What's up, Facebook and YouTube? I forgot to tell you, Xander, we're also live streaming to YouTube. So
Oh, excellent.
now we're worldwide, you guys. So now you're going to be like a YouTube influencer after this. So congratulations on that.
I'm adding that to my resume right now.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Just type it in real quick. But, we are talking food businesses, and there's no better person to talk food businesses than our good buddy Xander from the Ennovation Center. He's our go-to guy and also a library lover because we can get him to wear a Square One shirt at any given moment. So, you know what, Xander?
Outfit that
Yes, the break out of the Square One outfit. So we should order new T-shirts, and we'll get your input on those, so we can get more headshots of you because you're one of our favorite presenters. So I'll stop rambling and let you take it away because we're talking about building a solid foundation for starting a restaurant, which we need more restaurants right now because unfortunately, sad face, a lot of them did not survive 2020. And I'm hungry, so I need the people to start more restaurants and successfully.
absolutely. And it's a great point. There's a lot of, it's never not an interesting time to get into the restaurant industry, but it's a particularly interesting time with a lot of opportunity. So definitely, those folks that have that restaurant idea, it's been hanging around in the back of your mind like for a little while. Now might be the best time. It just kind of depends. So tonight, like Hannah said, we're going to talk about some of those fundamentals, building that solid business plan, solid foundation for launching your restaurant idea. So thank you,
without
Hannah.
further ado, I'm going to fade into the background. I'll let you take it away, Xander.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you, Mid-Continent Public Library, for hosting me for this event. Always have a great time talking with restaurant owners. I know we're still doing this virtual, so if you have questions, comments, anything you want me to elaborate on, please put it in the chat. I can see that. If you're watching this and it's not live, put it in the chat anyway. We'll be checking in on this. So if you've got questions, you're watching this later on in the week, and you're like, oh wait, I want to know more about this. I'm happy to help out, and the fantastic folks at Mid-Continent Public Library are always very, very helpful. Speaking of that, make sure when you get that survey from Mid-Continent that you fill that out. That is what is allowing them to put on these programs for no cost. So definitely fill out that survey. And it also helps inform me on classes, either what classes to offer or what information to really focus on or to add to these classes. So definitely fill out those surveys. All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this class, all the information about starting up and building that business plan. So if you're watching live, one thing I like to do with all of our classes is I want to know who's out there. Tell me, a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit about your idea for your restaurant. I want to make sure that if I'm using some examples, I'm topical to the folks in the restaurant ideas in the audience. And yeah, if there's any particular topics that you or particular questions that you are tuning in right now and you're like, if nothing else, I want to know this particular thing, or I want to talk about, marketing for my restaurant, or I want to talk about, types of equipment. I don't know, whatever it is that you want to talk about, make sure that I know the class is for you all. So I want to spend the time going over the particular pieces of information that you want tonight. So definitely put that, if you're watching live, put that in the chat so I can see. Let's go over a real quick overview of the things that we're going to talk about tonight. Just starting off, we're going to talk about you and your customers. We're going to talk about the concept. We're going to talk about location. We're going to talk about your menu. Then we're going to get into the finances, talking about the money, talking about the legal stuff, permits, licenses, insurance, that kind of thing. And always popular topic. Then we'll be talking about marketing, operations and systems, and then we'll wrap up on human resources, employees, a very difficult topic for food service businesses right now, in particular, always has been, but particularly right now. So just to give you the agenda for the evening. So the first and one of the most important things as you are developing this plan that I think sometimes gets overlooked in the excitement and all of the energy around the idea and the concept, and something you really have to be honest with yourself is restauranting for you. And I always tell all of the classes that I do, there is a reason that I'm here at 6 o'clock teaching a class on restauranting and not running my own, because I know it's not for me. I've worked in restaurants, I've managed restaurants, and I know it isn't for me. The lifestyle, the hours, it's for some folks, that is what they want to do. And that is awesome. Because like Hannah was saying, we need you. We need you out there. So we've got fantastic dining options, but it is not for everybody. So you really do need to be honest with yourself. And it seems like an obvious thing, but I'll tell you right now, one of the number one reasons that a food business that my organization works with, one of the number one reasons why they will close has nothing to do with not having the customers or not having a solid business plan. It's that after a couple years, they look back and they're like, I don't want this for my life. The working all the holidays and weekends, and it's stressful. Honestly, you have to take the good with the bad, and it's not for everybody. So it seems like an obvious thing, but we see it quite often where folks after the fact. So it's okay. And like I was saying, it's not for me. I recognize that. I love all my restaurant businesses. I love the restaurants that I frequent. I want to be able to help them out, but just acknowledging the fact it is not for everybody. So you really need to think about the time that was going to go into this. You'll have to think about the finances. We'll talk about this more. It takes a lot of money to start a restaurant, and it is one of those businesses that is particularly difficult to finance. So you're working on this primarily personally. So you really need to think about the money that's need to go into it, and be honest about the money that's coming back out to you. In those first few years, maybe it's nothing. That's very common. So thinking about how much that you need to put into that and what you can survive on. And do you just have the bandwidth and the energy to be spending those 60, 70, 80-hour plus weeks getting this thing going? Because you'll really need to be able to commit that. Are you at a place in your life where you can do that for a few years, at least, to really get this thing successfully launched? So just be honest about those things. If nothing else, you'll be in an emotional state that you can handle it if you're going in with those explicit expectations. So be honest about some of the negatives that come along with it. But at the end of the day, too, the positives are, this is your dream. This is, if you're, there are folks that just live hospitality, want to, break bread with the community, with their customers. So that's the positive, that all that time and money and effort and sweat and tears is worth it in the end. You just got to be honest about it with yourself to begin with. Now let's start with your customers. And there's a reason that I'm starting here. I'm not starting with the menu. I'm not starting with the location. A lot of times that is where kind of folks start this business plan building process, but you really want to start with the folks that will be spending money on your food, and really take off the entrepreneur hat and put on the customer hat, and really think about who it is that's buying your food. What other things are important to them? That's going to affect your plan. That's going to affect your location. That's going to affect how you set up your dining area. You know, it could be very similar cuisines, but if your target market is looking for a family environment versus like a place that you take a date environment, that's going to be a significant variable that you don't want to guess on. You don't want to say, well, I think it's going to be this. No, you want to try to figure out and start connecting, doing some research on your target market, on what they want, not what you think that they want. So definitely, as the entrepreneur, you need to be able to, step out of the business owner role and really think from the customer point of view, and be able to collect some information, start talking to folks, and kind of figure out what really is, important to them, and how you're going to connect with them too. You can't just take the customers for granted that they will come and find you. You'll need to be thinking about your strategies on that target market, on how you will actively go out and tell them eventually, hey, I'm starting a restaurant, or I've opened a restaurant. This is the environment, this is the food, the menu. You need to be thinking about how you can connect with them strategically. Let's talk about the concept. So one thing, again, early on in this process, is you will want to think about, what is your key value proposition? Like, what is the thing that gets customers to spend money at your establishment over all the other options that they have? Now, one thing I hear a lot, and I cringe a little bit, is I'll hear folks say all the time, okay, my key value proposition is I have the best fill in the blank. I've got the best burger out there. I've got the best soup and salads out there. The food is the best and people will come and eat it. That's really for your customers to decide. Honestly, nobody opens up a restaurant thinking that they don't have the best X, Y, and Z. That is not a unique thing. Every restaurant goes into it, they've got the best, fill in the blank. So you want to think beyond, hey, I've got the best tasting thing. You need to figure out what is unique to your overall establishment. Is it that it is it's really good barbecue, but the service is great and it's the place to take the family, and it's set up that way. In Kansas City, there's tons of options for barbecue. So this is a great example on where you really need to be able to differentiate yourself beyond just the menu. So there is more than, because it's not up to you to say your food is the best. That is up for your customers. So you need to think about the things that are even going to get them into the door to try it, to decide it is their favorite barbecue in this particular case. So you really need to have that core value that you were able to communicate, that you're able to say if you're getting on social media, if you're doing some advertising, if you're participating maybe in some events to get some exposure, whatever it is. What is that core thing that you can tell those prospective customers, like, this is why you should come here? Like, this is, what we're about, in addition to the barbecue, like with that example, like it's the place to take the family. Be thinking about that. And that's all derived from that information that you've got about your target market, about your customers, about knowing what's important to them, in addition to having good food, you'll be able to develop an overall plan, strategy, concept for this restaurant that really speaks to, attracts your customers. And then again, you hear folks say, if you build it, they will come. Don't bank on that. There's always exceptions to the rule, but in the most cases, it's not you build it, they come. You have to be strategic about, okay, you've got a concept. You've got, the value that you are providing to your customers. You've got the best XYZ thing on the menu. You need to think strategically about, are there events that you need to do? Is there particular social media platforms that you need to be on? Wherever it is that your customers are, how are you strategically communicating, hey, I exist, I'm a new restaurant, and you should try us out and decide if this is the best, barbecue that you've ever had or the best burger that you've ever had. So thinking about how that works too, because you see, restaurants that have opened in the past and then have closed their doors like within months. You're like, wow, I didn't even have a chance to go out and try that place. How did they already, one of those things is, making sure that when you open the doors, you've got, all those costs of the restaurant right off the bat. You need to be able to cash flow. So don't just leave it up to chance and like, oh, hopefully folks find us. We're set up here. Be thinking strategically about how you communicate that with your prospective customers. All right, let's talk about location. Now, there's a reason that this is like step 3 in the process and not step 1, where we see it show up a lot, where folks find a location that they really love and then they start building a concept around that location. People don't start businesses, they start businesses because of people. People are what drives your business. Folks spending money. You want to start with the people and then build the other components around that. That includes the location. So if you know your target market, you can do some, information gathering. So if you've got some demographic, psychographic information that you know about your target market, hey, you can connect with Mid-Continent Public Library. They've got some fantastic databases on that that you can map around and see, hey, where are their concentrations of the folks that are most likely to spend money on my particular concept and menu? And then start to look at locations there. That is really what the large restaurant chains do. They don't just pick a location because it looks good or it fits the dining room that they want or the kitchen size. They look at the demographic information and traffic flows and, are there enough humans that we know will spend money on our particular business within this area? So definitely taking advantage of those resources and then finding the location that works for your customers, not trying to find a location and then build a concept around that. That's quite the gamble. So definitely be thinking with your customer brain on and getting some data before you start committing to a particular location. Then beyond that, you want to make sure that the location meets the physical needs. So this is basically, does it have the ability to put in the grease trap and fume hood and all the physical components? Does it have a dining room that would meet the concept that you are trying to build? We talked about this. Making sure that you're close to your target market is really key there. And then doing your research to verify that. Don't take guesses on it. I think that the information is there and it's free from the library. So take advantage of that. All right, we got a question. What are your thoughts about a location that has had multiple failed restaurants there? So I definitely get this question pretty frequently. There is so many variables that go into restaurant failure. There is no, the people will ask, like, is this location cursed? Is it just not possible to run a successful restaurant here? And in most cases, there's exceptions to the rule, but in most cases, it's not, it's just that location has pros and cons. Maybe it's a location that's got great, it's right off the plaza and it's got like great organic traffic, but boy, is it going to cost you a lot of money. And most likely what's happening, in this case is there's multiple perfectly fine business models. Maybe it's franchises that have worked at other locations, but on the plaza, at a location that's just going to cost them too much, the math doesn't work out. Maybe it's a location that is really far out from, neighborhoods, population density, that you really need to attract people to that location. So if you keep putting in restaurants that really need organic traffic, they need people around there to see and say, oh yeah, I'd like to stop by there. And they don't have a strategy that's something unique to make the trip worth it, then those will fail there. So in any location, whether, there's been multiple attempts there or not, there are pros and cons. And again, many variables. So it could just be a difficult landlord to work with. Maybe you reach out to folks that have been there before. That could be the case. And that is definitely one of the cons that you want to know about ahead of time before you're committing to 3, 4, 5 year lease term. If you're going to be working with maybe a property owner that doesn't want to work with you on whatever it may be. So lots of different variables. And that's why some research and getting some information and really looking at it strategically, not just the fact, here's the other component that might be going in there. Maybe that property owner is really desperate to just keep somebody there long term, so they give you a really good deal. Again, you're not thinking about you're like, oh boy, great deal. Maybe it's obviously been set up for a restaurant before. It's got the grease trap dining room still in there. What a great deal. Let's go into that. But you have to think about all the other variables that make a restaurant function. Is your target market for that concept there? If not, it doesn't matter that you get a good deal if you're not going to get customers and enough customers to even, get to the point of profitability there. So lots of variables, no cursed locations. You just have to do your homework ahead of time, figure out what are the cons, the difficult components of that location. And if I really think it makes sense to go there, how do I overcome those particular difficulties? But it's probably just a case of folks find, hey, great deal, property owner really wants somebody there, and you just keep cycling through because the deal's really attractive. That could be the case. But again, lots of variables. If you do your homework ahead of time, I honestly think any location can work out for you. Actually, I'll go on a little tangent here. There's one example that I really love. There was this restaurant in Jacksonville, Florida. It made absolutely no sense. It was located in the middle of a swamp, like minutes away from any kind of civilization, like middle of swamp. And it broke all the rules. They had a huge, insane menu that I would never recommended for a restaurant. They had a live alligator living in their lobby, actually. Made no sense, but the place was always busy. But it was unique. You went there for the experience. The decor was crazy. You're literally eating on top of a swamp. People went out of their way to go to that location. If you put in and you're just like, it's the best burger joint, and it may very well have been. It could have been the best burger joint, best burger you ever could have. Are people going to drive 30 minutes into the swamp where there's no signs of civilization just for a really good burger? Maybe not. You got to really build in some more components to that. So lots of variables that contribute to a restaurant success. All right, going back. All right, here. So again, verifying all that information. That's what we were just talking about. What strategies will you employ to overcome the challenges of that location? All right, and at some point early in the process, you will want to talk with your regulatory agencies. So city, maybe it's county, health department, however it's set up, figure that out ahead of time. Again, I'd recommend early on in the process. So if there is any real kickers, if there's any real deal breakers, like maybe it's just not, we've run into situations where it's just not possible to put in the ventilation for the fume hoods for, that would be required. So don't put yourself in a position where you're committing to something already. Then you're talking to the health department in the city and they're like, yeah, that won't function in that building because for whatever XYZ reason it happens. So be having those conversations early on before you make commitments to a particular location, and figuring that out with the landlord too, of hey, we need to put in these hood systems, we need to drill in a grease trap, we need to be able to do these fundamental components to make our business go. Is that even doable? So be having that conversation early on. It just sets a good precedent and makes the process a lot easier if you're working with your regulatory agencies early on, because they know, hey, this person's trying to do it, by the book. We really want to help them out. Most of the time, the city wants you there. Maybe the individuals working at the, city hall are like, yeah, we would love to have this restaurant to go to lunch to. So they want you there. So working with them early on makes it easier for everybody. All right, we'll transition here. Let's talk about the food itself. This is the fun part. This is where most folks are coming in. They have worked through a menu. You have a great idea. Your friends and family have had these menu items. They're like, it's the best thing. That's probably what got you to the point of thinking that, like, hey, I could make a restaurant, make a business out of this, because your friends and family are like, yeah, you should sell this. You should start up the restaurant. So you probably have this already thought through, but the part you also have to think about is making it make business sense. We have this conversation with a lot of our restaurants and food businesses where maybe there's a particular menu item that, they really love. It's grandma's eggplant pasta. But if it doesn't make business sense, if you're looking at the ingredients and you'd have to charge, above what your customers are going to pay for a particular menu item, if it's not going to move, if it's going to result in some food waste, then it may not make sense to keep on the menu. So make sure that you are thinking about the business side of things as well. Here's another big one that has kind of surprised me. Okay, think strategically about why you are pricing menu items the way you are. I've talked with a number of restaurants where, I will ask, I'm like, okay, why is the spaghetti priced at $12? And they're like, well, I saw other spaghettis priced around that amount, so that's what I picked. And that is not the way. It's good to kind of have an idea of what, market rate for a particular item is or what other folks are charging for it. But you really need to start with your own cost of goods. You need to figure out what it costs for you to put out that plate of spaghetti and then build your pricing off of that to know, like, hey, am I making enough of a profit margin to cover my other expenses selling this item? We've worked particularly with barbecue restaurants, especially when particular meats fluctuate in price. I'll have folks that just say, like, man, I really hope people don't order the brisket right now because quite honestly, I'm losing money on it. But knowing that is important. So if it continues, the cost of those goods continues to stay at that or continue to increase, you can adjust accordingly. Or, maybe that menu item just needs to be taken off or replaced. So you really, I know this is what your heart and soul is connected to, is these menu items, but at the end of the day, they all have to make business sense. We were talking a little bit too about, potential of food waste. Again, that eggplant dish. If, you're selling 3 of them a week and you're throwing out the other case of eggplant, again, you're losing money on that dish. Maybe it is one of your customers' favorite items, but again, it has to make business sense. So making sure that you're incorporating those, because sometimes I'll see businesses that don't incorporate that at all, and they don't look at that food waste cost and really how that's affecting them. So that's going to affect your menu as well. And kind of figuring out just the strategy of the actual logistics of making food. So if you've got, the pork belly on the menu that takes 40 minutes to get out the window, and the rest of your items are, fried up in 5 minutes, how is that going to make things difficult? Because I know as a customer, you know this. When you see that table that got there like 30 minutes after you and they get served their food before you, and I know the reasons behind it, and I still get mad. I'm like, so just making those logistics, ticket times, and getting that food out in some reasonable fashion, be thinking about that as well. So you want to be able to get those meals out together, fresh, hot, not sitting on, somebody else's meal was sitting under the heat lamp for the 30 minutes while that pork belly was getting ready. So be thinking about those times as well in your menu. That's got to make sense also. All right. The big thing, you got to make the money work. That's the single axiomatic thing. Everything else feeds into that, like the customers and the location and the menu and your staff. At the end of the day, you have to make money. So you need to start thinking about this before you start putting in those financial investments, like committing to a lease or buying a building, or maybe starting to, get permits or whatever it may be. Really do your homework ahead of time and pre-plan, know what it's going to cost. Think about all the operations, all the small wares, start pricing up, be looking at Restaurant Depot, talk to your, Cisco, US Foods, sales rep, start getting those actual prices together, start talking to the towel company, the chemical company, what's it cost to put in that fume hood. All of those costs you can get down exactly ahead of time. And you're doing yourself no favors by not getting that information all together in one place ahead of time to really map out, is this financially feasible? That's really, before we start making financial commitments. And we've done this. We've worked on business plans where we look at that demographic information, the costs of everything involved, the size of the potential dining room, and what we really anticipate that could be a best, middle ground, best case, worst case scenario. And there have just been plans that do not work in that area. You just cannot reasonably expect enough people to spend enough money to pay back all of the costs for that particular concept. And that's okay. That's absolutely okay. We can make some changes. It's easy to do that in the planning stages. It is immensely difficult and troubling to do that once you have built it out, committed to that location, hired people, and then look back and you're like, whew, even if we fill up this dining room, 5 days a week, we're still not getting to break even. Sometimes that happens. You want to know that ahead of time, and you can. So making sure that you're really planning out those costs ahead of time. And they are extensive in a lot of cases. Restaurants, just the equipment and potential construction and likely an architect, all of those things are going to add up to a hefty amount. We'll look into this a little bit more, kind of go over some national averages on what you might be looking at as far as cost, but don't base it off of my example that I've sent out. Definitely do the homework ahead of time and really figure out all the details on that costing. You really can't, as much detail as you can get, like the teaspoons, how much do those cost? Each of those towels that you'll be going through, you'll be surprised how much money a restaurant spends on like towels and chemicals, and you really don't think about those things. But that needs to be factored into your operations. Because when we look at, in fact, I'm going to pull it up here. So for those of you who have registered for this class ahead of time, you have a handy dandy email with some handouts. For those of you who did not register, welcome anyway. We are happy to have you. But you might put a comment out and we can send that information to you, send you those handouts. We just need to know you're out there, so let us know in the comments. One of those handouts is this little spreadsheet. Too small to show you on the screen. But if you look on there, there's a couple columns and then particular categories, very general categories of expenses for restaurants. I've got the national averages. This is about a year or two old now, so it might be a little different. And then we've got an example of an actual Kansas City restaurant that gave us just very, very general numbers on kind of where they were at. Because the problem with averages is almost nobody is the average. So having those two compared to one another at least sets an idea of what might be reasonable as far as expenditures, as far as the ratios of your salaries versus your rent versus your food, and kind of seeing and comparing that to, again, the average and to a particular example. Again, don't base any of those major decisions on this. This is just to kind of get you into the ballpark. Do that homework, work with some of the resources that exist out there, whether that's working with somebody with SCORE, free business mentors, whether that's the Small Business Development Center, whether that is Mid-Con Public Library, Square One team. There are people who are out there to help with this, because unless finances is your expertise, this might be all like out of your realm, but still incredibly important. That doesn't mean that you neglect it. It means you spend more time on it. As painful as it may be, because for some folks, they're like, I'm the artist, I'm in the kitchen, I'm making menu items. Well, then you really need to figure out on your team, whether that is a resource that you're connecting with, or it is a CPA or a contract CFO or whoever it is that you are working with, a business partner, that is their thing, because it's so important. And here's the real kicker. If you look on that sheet, if you've got it in front of you, you'll see that the average profit margin for restaurants is less than 5%. And that's crazy. But that is what it is. That is the industry. That restaurants, now that's after, now you're thinking like, I cannot live off of 5%. No, you're counting yourself as an employee in this factoring. So you're still paying yourself, in this particular case, a salary for the work that you're doing in the restaurant, whether you're cooking or you're, serving or whatever you may be doing. But at the end of the day, the restaurant itself is not in a bad place as far as an industry standard by making 5% profit. What that means is that everything is so important when you are figuring out your financial plan, because you're that small percentage away from I'm making money to I'm losing money. And you can't lose money for very long. Well, actually, I don't know your personal financial situation, but for most folks starting a restaurant, you cannot lose money for a very long time. So you really have to keep your eye on the numbers. You really have to look at that costing for your food. You really need to look at, daily, really, at your expenses and income to be able to make changes quickly. So you don't want to go back at the end of the year and say, ooh, we really should have taken that one menu item off because, you know, every one we sold, we actually lost $3 on, or we really need to adjust our, you know, how many folks we had in the kitchen. We really didn't need 7 folks. We could have done 6. And again, it's those relatively small things that can eat into that 5% profit margin. So that's why it's so important to really look at your numbers, be on top of them, and have somebody, if it's not you, have somebody on your team, CPA resource, that can help you out with that. Also, for starting up, and I alluded to this earlier on, banks typically do not lend to start up food businesses. If you're going for a traditional bank loan, you typically need to be in business for 3 years. So you're in this crazy catch-22 where you're like, well, I can't get started and make sales. I can't get the money to get started. So in a lot of cases, the folks that we work with will start doing pop-ups. They'll start with a food trailer. They'll start doing events or catering or another business type that has a lower threshold of money it takes to get started, but can get the establishment going, get you revenue, get the brand set up, so that later on, if that phase 2 or 3 is to have the bricks and mortar restaurant, you're in a position where you could potentially get financing, maybe get investment. But if you go in and you haven't been operating the business for a few years to a bank, the chances are so slim that you're getting a business loan or any kind of financing really for that. So be thinking, where's that money coming from? Is it personal savings? Is it cashing out, retirement? Is it, you know, whatever it may be? You'll have to think of something. Or is it family and friends? That's a really common one for our startup food businesses. So you really have to be honest with yourself about that as well. The most beautiful restaurant business plan, if it's just concept stage, again, always exceptions to the rule. So if somebody is that exception, I love hearing that. That is fun, but it usually is just that. It's the exception to the rule most cases. You'll need to be thinking about how you're financing that or bootstrapping it or getting it going off the ground strategically to get to that final phase of that large bricks and mortar restaurant that you've envisioned. All right, let's talk about the legal stuff that you'll need to have. Again, depending on your location, but any restaurant, you're starting off, you're setting up some sort of entity. You might have heard of businesses setting up as an LLC or a corporation. You've got some options on how you set up the entity, but a very important first legal decision that may very well be something that you'll want to consult with either a legal resource. I know like folks with UMKC, there are folks that work with startup businesses, or if you've got an attorney that you work with or that you know of, that may make a lot of sense. Also your CPA, your entity status in some of those selections, all going to affect, you know, legal and have legal and tax implications down the road. So having an informed decision on how you set up is going to be important. Making sure that you're getting your tax IDs, and then the local permits are where it gets a little stickier. That's why, remember, I had talked about earlier on in the process, you've already developed your relationship with the folks at City Hall. They're excited about your concept. They want to see it get started. So working with those folks to help you with the local stuff, because again, it gets kind of sticky. You've got construction, you've got health, you've got fire, you've got parking, you've got outdoor signage and decks and all sorts of different components there. You want to know, at this point, you should know, because you've early in the planning process, you kind of looked through that and kind of had an idea of what's coming down the pipeline. Again, yeah, we talked about making sure that you got your health and fire. And then there's also those special permits. Ooh, liquor licenses. Very important, very profitable, also very sticky, getting it all set up. It takes some time. I see tons of new restaurants who are like, I promise we're going to have our liquor license at some point. It just takes a lot of time. So come back later and we'll have drinks. So be prepared for the cost in time that it takes there. If you're selling, food products, I have a whole nother class for that one. That's its own set of rules. So you're also selling your jarred barbecue sauce at that barbecue establishment. That's another thing. Like I said, another class that I do with Mid-Continent on that one. Special events sometimes, noise permits or dance floors. So making sure that you've kind of got that all mapped out and you've had that conversation with the folks, whether it's the county or city or whatever local jurisdiction, that you kind of know ahead of time and it doesn't come up later that you're like, hey, you didn't tell us about that deck. That is another thing that we needed to inspect, or we didn't know that you were going to have a stage. That's a separate thing. So just being very forthright with the regulatory folks, so you can make sure you get all that stuff and kind of have an idea of what other permits and processes will need to occur to make sure you're all set up to do those things. And then insurance, very important. You will absolutely, getting started, most cities are going to require you to have general liability. You're going to 99.999% of the time, you're going to need that like day one. Not that you don't want it. Workers' comp, depending on your state and how many folks that you are employing, it may just be required right off the bat, being in the food. Some states, like Missouri, for example, have a threshold that of how many folks that you're employing before it's absolutely required. But your employees, you work in an environment of hot boiling things and sharp spinning equipment. It is a dangerous place. There is no reason you really probably want to start off with workers' comp. I've got so many stories, and for all the folks out there that have worked in the food industry, you've probably got so many stories of things where you're like, wow, that was crazy and very dangerous. So workers' comp is going to be important. Property insurance too. If you own that property, if you've got some sort of insurance that covers it, if you're renting the whatever that you've got covered, there's special insurance for just covering your produce if the freezers go out. Maybe that's wrapped into your general liability. Insurance gets involved. So I guess what I can leave you with here is this is another thing, just like you have a conversation and really go into the details with the regulatory agencies on all the different things that you want to do, have that conversation with your insurance agent. Work with an insurance agent that is familiar with restaurants so they can help you navigate that. Again, it gets really sticky. I don't know how many times we've had somebody, something happen and they look back through and they're like, oh, we got general liability. That covers that, right? Maybe, possibly, but it also might not. You really need to make sure that you're communicating that and making sure that you're getting the coverage on things that you really need to. So make sure that is a strategic sit down conversation with your agent on that to make sure that you're covered for really what you need to be covered for. All right, that's all the things, right? It's time to get open. This is where the planning ahead of time really helps out because you've already talked with your regulatory agencies, you've looked at the location, you've got an idea of what needs to be done. In this process, I always, recommend that our future restaurant owners, come prepared emotionally and financially to expect the unexpected. There will be extra costs. There will be more time involved than what you originally planned. That's just how it goes. I almost never work with a restaurant that gets done ahead of time or really on time. I usually, folks will say, all right, we're going to be open in 3 months, probably 4, 5, 6 months, somewhere in that time frame. It's just there's gonna be other stuff. So just making sure that you're prepared for that as it comes up. All right, so now, again, we've already started a relationship with potential suppliers. We've talked to them to get that pricing. So now it's time to connect with those folks, get that set up. We've probably talked with a CPA about that entity formation. So now it's time to get rolling with that, bookkeeper or tax professional or CPA. This is an important time to say that those individuals may or may not be the same person. It is very possible that, a bookkeeper is not a CPA or not a tax professional. So that's another conversation to have to make sure that that person is going to be able to provide you the service that you are wanting. So, we've had folks that have signed up with bookkeepers, and about tax time, they're like, oh, you're doing my taxes, right? And they're like, no, that's not my thing. I keep the books. You'll have to connect with somebody else. Maybe I've got some recommendations for a tax professional. So again, that's not that same person. Make sure you're talking with that service provider that they're going to be able to provide you the services that you really need. This is another one. If tech's not your thing, especially now, if you're incorporating, delivery services into your website and payment processing through there, making sure that you've got a service or a person on your team that can help with that. And the furnishing and the legal assistance, we've kind of talked about that these should ideally be folks that you have before your opening had conversations with. You've priced out that equipment from the location. So now it's time to call them back up and say, all right, we're ready. We've got the place coming together for us to order that and start bringing that stuff in. So again, this is the exciting part, but hopefully you've started these conversations with folks ahead of time. All right. Let's transition over to marketing. For those of you who have the handouts, we've got another one, nice blue sheet of paper here, marketing for your restaurant. If you wanted to follow along there, one thing that I get a lot from folks, especially if marketing is not their background, I'll say, hey, how are you going to market your restaurant? And they'll say, well, I got my social media set up. I've got my Facebook. I'm good to go. And that's it, because there's more to marketing than just having your social media platforms set up and posting on them. Your marketing is really an overall strategy for communicating with your current and prospective customers. So you're really thinking about not just how you're getting the message across. Maybe it is social media, but also what that message is and what that message specifically is supposed to accomplish. So maybe it is fine enough that you're posting and you're just letting people know, hey, I exist. But you really want to think strategically about your whole marketing process, what that message is, how you're delivering it, and really, too, what that goal is overall. So one of the first, overall kind of marketing decisions is kind of developing that brand. Your brand is the personality of your business. And I tell folks to really think of it that way, that it is really that It's a personality. Think about your business like it was a person. How would your business communicate? If it's that family style restaurant, that's a certain way of communicating. That's, you're incorporating different design elements into your overall online and physical spaces. That's different than the place that you go and take people out on a date. Possibly. It's different than the hip divey location. So really think of strategically. This needs to connect back to your customers. Also, what do they like? What connects with them? So it's not just about what you want. You're like, oh, I'd love this restaurant, to have this personality and feel. That's great. But does that connect with the people who are spending money on your food? That's the more important question as you are developing that brand and, developing that logo or developing that website. We've collected some information. Possibly, maybe you did start off doing pop-ups. So you've got some hard information about your target market that you've collected from the folks that you've talked to at your pop-ups or as a caterer. So you can use that information to really build a informed marketing strategy. And then the other step that we don't want to forget about is making sure that we're getting something for our marketing efforts. So making sure that we are built in some measuring tool. So when we do launch a marketing campaign, spend money on advertising, making sure that we're getting some return on that investment. Actually, before we get into systems, let's stay on marketing here. If you look at the fun sheet and graphics I have put together for you, there's a bottom section. That talks about setting up a marketing campaign. And I liken it to a science experiment. So you've got a hypothesis. The hypothesis is, if I get on Instagram and I post these photos and I tell people, I want you to share, and I've built some competition strategy to get people more involved. You've got a hypothesis that if I do these things, then I am going to get more new customers, or maybe I'll develop more of a online following, or maybe I will get more repeat customers, or there's something measurable that you specifically want out of that campaign. So develop that hypothesis. If I do this, this will happen. Then you build the strategy. So that's, okay, I need to, communicate on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, or I need to attend these particular events, maybe it's partnering with nonprofit organizations, for their event to make sure that we get exposure there, or it's sponsoring certain things, or whatever the strategies and then the tactics. So the specific things that you're doing at those events, the specific posts that you're putting on those social media platforms. And then at a certain interval, so maybe you do this for a season, for a month, whatever it may be, go back and measure it and see, did I really get more new customers? And again, what's important there is, how do you know if they're new customers or not? So you got to develop that way of going back. Because what I see a lot of folks do is they'll spend money on things. They'll go to events, they'll sponsor stuff, they'll do advertising or whatever it may be. And at the end of the day, I'm like, what did you get for that? Is there a return on investment? And there really wasn't a way to measure it to know in the first place. So maybe it was a good investment of time and resources, or maybe it was a complete waste. You really don't know. So you really want to build in that measuring component to your campaigns, so you can even see if it's worthwhile to continue doing those things, spending the advertising money, spending time, paying somebody to manage a social media platform, or whatever it may be in your marketing, just knowing that you're getting an actual return on your investment. All right. Systems. Systems is not a very sexy topic whatsoever. It's often overlooked. You see this as a breaking point for a lot of those restaurant rescue type shows that you see, of just different components that need to be, there needs to be a strategy behind them, and they need to function, again, to be profitable. If you're working with tiny, tiny profit margins for a restaurant, you need to be making sure that you're paying attention to all the details. So simple things like, how are you checking for food quality? I've seen this happen with restaurants where I really like them, great restaurants, but then you start to hear people say like, yeah, it really went downhill. Maybe it was a different manager, or maybe it was a different staff, or maybe they're just not paying attention, but the food just isn't as good as it once was. Thinking strategically, how do you test for that and make sure that, you know, folks aren't cutting corners or there isn't some issue there? Inventory protocol. I love, you know, and by love I mean hate, when you go to a restaurant and you order an item and they're like, oh, we're out of that. Okay, you know, that happens, but then you order something else and they're, we're out of that too. Okay, by the second, third, fourth items, it was somebody not taking stock of the inventory or some particular issue there. So who's responsible for telling who to order what? That it shouldn't just be like, oh, we're all out of potatoes now, make sure we order them next week. No, you want to know, hey, we're at 25% of our inventory stock. We need to make sure that we're ordering that next week so we're in a good position. So you've got that, all the folks that need to know that inventory protocol. Emergencies. We've seen this too. You know, somebody, you prepare, you want to make sure it doesn't happen, but somebody's gonna get cut or hurt. It's the restaurant industry, so you need to be prepared for that. Make sure your folks know what to do in case of those emergencies, where that first aid kit is it accessible, is it stocked, and making sure folks know what to do then, who reports to who, especially when you get in the heat of the rush hour, making sure that folks are contributing to productivity, and especially not being counter to it. I've seen where restaurants really start to break down when, you know, the new person just doesn't know where they're supposed to be or what to go. And they're trying to like, hey, who needs help? And they're really just in the way in that tiny kitchen space. And you're just like, I don't know, get out of the way. So just making sure that you strategically got that set up when you get really busy, make sure that your folks know, you know, what they should be doing, where they should be, to contribute to getting, you know, food on plates and out the window. And this goes into, you know, that the finances again. How are those sales, you know, tracked, reported, and how is that being fed into something that you can make decisions from, like taking off menu items or staffing decisions or whatever it may be, that you've got some sort of way of tracking that on a regular basis of money coming in. And determining those staff needs, and making sure that you've got enough people to do the job, but not so much that, you know, they're in the way, and maybe, you know, negatively contributing to productivity. So making sure that you've got a strategy for that. And the last major topic for the night is humans. This is always for restaurants been a tough thing, and it is insanely hard right now. So you really need to be thinking about, well, here's the bottom line. At some point, you will not be working in your business, you'll be working on it. So you're not making the food. You're not serving the food. You're not necessarily, maybe you are greeting people at the door, but for the most part, this is in the hands of your employees. They are the ones that your entire customer experience is in their hands. So you want to make sure that all of this money and time and heart, and sweat and tears that you've put into this, you need to make sure it's in good hands. So making sure that you are figuring out, how do you find good people? How do you keep them? The temptation a lot of times is to start with your friends and family. No, sometimes there's always exceptions to the rule, but that's going to be a difficult start. I know with my friends, I'm like, hey, sweep up that glass. They're going to be like, no, Xander, you do it. Like, they're not going to make for great employees. They're not going to listen to me. We're friends. So you really want to think strategically again, like, maybe your family and friends are a good fit for a restaurant. Maybe not. I know they want to help you out, but maybe it really does make sense. You need to find good employees. Again, the customer experience is in their hand. Another thing to think about is turnover is a lot more expensive than you think, because you're not getting, full productivity out of the folks that you're training. So however long it takes to train for certain positions, you got to factor in the fact that that person's, you're paying them and they're not really being super productive. And then you've got somebody training them and they're also not as productive. So, for a period of time, those two individuals probably get done the work that one regular person that's not training or in training would get done. So you're paying twice as much during those times of training. And a lot of people don't think about that, but that contributes greatly to your staffing costs. So you want to be able, when you find good folks, you don't want to lose them. So you want to think about strategically, why is your restaurant a good place to work? How are you going to keep those employees around? Because happy employees make for happy customers in a lot of cases. There was one example of a local restaurant that closed down for like 6 months for extensive reconstruction. And when they opened back up after 6 months, all of the staff, 100% of the staff came back after 6 months. And I thought, there is no way. So I actually talked with them and they're just like, yeah, we really liked working here. Everybody, and that restaurant did think about, okay, what are these people going to do and make a living while this restaurant's closed? So they worked with other restaurants, either that they owned or that, were around in the area, that hey, can you use this extra help? So they really thought about their employees at that particularly difficult time. And it was payback that when they did open, they didn't have to hire new folks. It was the same staff coming back. They're back into their same old roles. So I thought that was a really cool example of them really creating an environment that their employees liked to work at, that they would come back to, and really thinking about their own like personal lives and their need for income in that particular instance. So you really want to think about that strategically. It makes a lot of business sense. Again, when we're talking about that turnover, it makes a lot of business sense too, with making sure that your quality and experience for your customers stays top notch, because you put too much effort into this for it not to be. That's my last topic for the evening. If you have questions after the fact, if you're watching this later, please put those questions out. You've got my email there too. So if you want to ask me something, shoot me an email. Definitely, I encourage you all, like, next steps. Connect with some of those resources that I mentioned. Mid-Continent Public Library that puts on this event. Fantastic resource. Tonight, we talked specifically about some other future classes that they offer. We talked about their access to databases. I didn't mention they spend a lot of money on those. So that is like for a great value of information to you that's perfectly free to you. KC SourceLink is an organization that aggregates all the different resources. So like the organization I work for, the Ennovation Center, Mid-Continent Public Library, a lot of the other ones that I mentioned are all in that website. So definitely give that a look to figure out some of those next steps, some of those other resources that you can connect with to help you build this plan and launch it successfully. Another thing, I'd mentioned that survey that helps us put on awesome programming, helps the library do all the classes that they do. So make sure you fill out that survey. Good luck with your business planning adventure. I look forward to those future restaurants that are getting started and are just in the planning stages now. And yeah, I hope everybody has a fantastic evening.
Thanks, Xander. You're the best. I, I've seen this class a few times, but every time I can extract another piece of information that's mostly good for me to relay to other people. But the systems and the automation is something that is so huge now. It's not something that a lot of people think about, and I thought that was really interesting. But do you remember we had a boot camp with Jason Rule 5 years ago with Corner Cafe, and something that he mentioned that has always stuck with me is that, I mean, obviously they're known for their cinnamon rolls, but he's like, nobody in any of his restaurants makes the cinnamon roll to his standard, but his standard is so high and his recipe and his systems are so good that even when they make it and it's not a 100%, then 90% is still better than anybody else's. And I'm like, that's so smart and so interesting to think about. And it also made me want his cinnamon roll. I'm like, could you please make me one?
But yeah, that is so interesting that you really do need to think about. It's not just that you're handing off this recipe, but really the process behind it, and sometimes too the why. So no, when folks do think do I really need to do that part? Yes, you do. It is important. It is what is making this particular menu item what it is. But taking that same kind of thought and care into some of the other aspects of the business is just going to, again, just help elevate you and ultimately help you have a successful, profitable restaurant.
And tasty cinnamon rolls.
Tasty cinnamon rolls. I have not had dinner yet. So.
Me either. So I'm like, okay, we got to get off this broadcast and go find something to eat. So
cinnamon roll for dinner. Don't judge me.
I'm here for it. I'll have 2. Thanks. Well, thank you, Xander. Please go eat something. We appreciate you. And, of course, for anybody watching, if you'd fill out that survey, that'd be super. It's in the comments. And, feel free to, if you're watching this later, drop your questions in the comments still. We're going to be monitoring those and we'll send them off to Xander and make sure you guys get connected. But I hope you guys have an awesome Tuesday. Xander, you're the best. Love you bunches. And we will.
It's a pleasure to join you.
We'll chat at you again another day.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.